The railroad tracks gleamed like twin silver snakes under the merciless Wyoming sun of 1878, where Josephine Davis sat with her trunk beside her, tears streaming down her face as she clutched a crumpled letter in her trembling hand. She had traveled over 1,000 miles on the promise of marriage to a man who, according to the station master, had died 3 weeks before her arrival. With no money for a return ticket and nowhere to go, she had collapsed beside the tracks, her once pristine blue traveling dress now dusty and tear-stained. Dust clouds rose in the distance as Daniel Patterson guided his horse toward the small train station of Willow Creek. He hadn't planned to come to town today, but his ranch needed supplies before the coming storm. The sight of a woman in distress by the tracks was unexpected. Daniel slowed his stallion, Thunderbolt, approaching cautiously. "Madam." He called out, tipping his hat back to reveal a sun-weathered face with kind blue eyes. "Are you in need of assistance?" Josephine looked up, startled by the deep voice. Through tear-blurred vision, she saw a tall man atop a magnificent chestnut horse. His broad shoulders were silhouetted against the bright sky, and for a moment she thought she might be hallucinating from the heat. "My intended," she stammered, her Boston accent pronounced against the western backdrop. "Mr. Hollister. The station master says he's dead." 3 weeks dead of typhoid, she held up the letter. "I'm a mail-order bride with no groom." Daniel dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. He knelt beside her, keeping a respectful distance. At 28, he'd seen his share of hardship, but the naked desperation in this woman's eyes stirred something in him. "Miss Davis, Josephine Davis, Miss Davis, you can't stay out here in this heat." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Storm's coming too. Let me take you somewhere safe." Josephine hesitated, weighing her limited options. "I have nowhere to go, sir. No money for a return ticket." Daniel stood and offered his hand. "I'm Daniel Patterson, own the Silvercrest Ranch about 5 miles from here. I can offer you shelter until you decide your next move." Josephine wiped her tears with a lace handkerchief. "Why would you help a stranger, Mr. Patterson?" A small smile crossed Daniel's face. "Out here we help folks in need. It's how we survive." He gestured to the approaching clouds. "And right now, you need help before that sky opens up." After a moment's consideration, Josephine placed her hand in his. His palm was calloused but his touch gentle as he helped her to her feet. Daniel efficiently secured her trunk to his saddle, then turned to her. "I'll need to lift you up if that's acceptable." Josephine nodded, and with surprising strength, Daniel lifted her onto his horse. He mounted behind her, maintaining a proper distance while reaching around to take the reins. "Hold on," he instructed as Thunderbolt began to trot. As they rode, Josephine became acutely aware of the man behind her. His chest was solid, his breathing steady. Despite her predicament, she felt oddly secure. "What brought you to become a mail-order bride, Miss Davis?" Daniel asked over the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats. Josephine stiffened. "My father's business failed. He died of heart failure shortly after." "The creditors took everything," her voice caught. "My options in Boston were limited." Daniel nodded, though she couldn't see it. "Many come west seeking new beginnings." "And you, Mr. Patterson, what's your story?" Came west after the war. "Worked cattle drives, saved enough to stake my claim. Been building Silvercrest for 6 years now." The rain began just as the ranch came into view, a modest main house with several outbuildings nestled in a picturesque valley. Daniel urged Thunderbolt faster, and they arrived at the covered porch as the downpour intensified. Daniel helped Josephine dismount. "Mrs. Winters," he called as they entered the house. An older woman with gray-streaked hair appeared from what Josephine assumed was the kitchen. "Land sakes, Daniel, who's this poor drenched thing?" Daniel explained the situation while Mrs. Winters fussed over Josephine, insisting she change into dry clothes immediately. The housekeeper led her to a small but clean bedroom. "Mr. Patterson is a good man, Mrs. Winters said as she laid out a simple dress. "Never known him to turn away someone in need." "Does he make a habit of rescuing stranded women?" Josephine asked, attempting humor despite her situation. Mrs. Winters chuckled. "You're the first, dear. Now change before you catch your death." Later, seated at the kitchen table with a bowl of hearty stew before her, Josephine felt her spirits lifting slightly. Daniel sat across from her, his presence somehow both commanding and comforting. "Mrs. Winters makes the best stew in the territory," he said, breaking the silence. "It's wonderful," Josephine agreed, realizing she was famished. "Mr. Patterson, I'm deeply grateful for your kindness, but I can't impose, you're not imposing. We've got the room and you need time to consider your options." "What options?" Josephine set down her spoon. "I have no funds, no connections here." Daniel leaned forward. "Willow Creek's growing. The school teacher just left to get married. You're educated, aren't you?" Josephine nodded. "I taught briefly in Boston. Then there's one option. Or," he paused, "you could work here until you save enough for a ticket home." "Here, doing what?" Mrs. Winters could use help with the household. "She's not as young as she used to be, though don't tell her I said so." He smiled, and Josephine noticed how it transformed his serious face. "That's very generous. It's practical. Think on it tonight. No decision needed right away." That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed, Josephine reflected on the bizarre turn her life had taken. She'd left Boston full of trepidation but hope, only to find herself at the mercy of a stranger's kindness. Daniel Patterson was unlike any man she'd met, straightforward, lacking the polished veneer of Boston gentlemen, yet possessing an inherent dignity and strength. Morning brought clear skies and new resolve. Josephine found Daniel in the barn, checking Thunderbolt's shoe. "Mr. Patterson, I'd like to accept your offer of employment if it still stands." Daniel straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth. "It does. Mrs. Winters will be pleased. I'll work hard and won't be a burden. Once I've saved enough, you're welcome here as long as needed, Miss Davis." The days fell into a pattern. Josephine helped Mrs. Winters with household tasks, learning Western cooking and discovering muscles she never knew she had. Daniel was often out working with his ranch hands, but evenings found the three of them sharing meals and conversation. 2 weeks into her stay, Josephine was beating rugs on the porch when riders approached. She recognized the town's sheriff among them. Daniel emerged from the barn, wiping sweat from his brow. "Sheriff Taylor, what brings you out this way?" The sheriff dismounted. "Got some questions about your guest, Patterson." He nodded toward Josephine. "Word spreads fast. Miss, we found some information about your intended Mr. Hollister." Josephine's heart raced. What about him? Seems he wasn't exactly forthright in his correspondence. He had gambling debts all over the territory, likely why he was advertising for a bride with a dowry. Josephine felt her face flush with embarrassment and anger. He mentioned nothing of debts. He described himself as a prosperous merchant. Sheriff Taylor shook his head. "Merchant, yes. Prosperous, no. His store was failing. Some folks are asking if you might be responsible for his outstanding accounts." Daniel stepped forward. "That's ridiculous. She never even met the man." "Just relaying the message, Patterson. Kendrick at the bank is particularly interested." After the sheriff left, Josephine sank onto the porch steps. "I had no idea, I thought." Her voice trailed off. Daniel sat beside her. "None of this is your fault. But I've gone from one impossible situation to another. If Mr. Hollister's creditors think I'm responsible, you're not. I'll ride into town tomorrow, speak with Kendrick." Josephine touched his arm impulsively. "Thank you, Daniel. You've shown me more kindness than anyone in my life." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Daniel cleared his throat and stood, just doing what's right. The next day, Daniel returned from town looking grim. "Kendrick's being stubborn. Claims since you came as Hollister's bride, his debts transfer to you." "That's absurd." "We weren't married, I know. Sheriff agrees with us, but Kendrick's got influence." Daniel hesitated. "There's something else. Train conductor remembered you, said you paid extra to bring a large trunk. Kendrick's suggesting you might have valuables." Josephine laughed bitterly. "Books mainly. Some family photographs, my mother's wedding dress." She blinked back tears. "Nothing of monetary value. Over the following weeks, the situation grew tense. Kendrick sent formal notices demanding payment. Sheriff Taylor, sympathetic but bound by law, warned that her trunk could be seized as potential payment. Meanwhile, life at Silvercrest continued. Josephine found unexpected joy in ranch life. She learned to gather eggs without frightening the hens, helped deliver a calf, and even tried riding with Daniel's patient instruction. Each day brought them closer, their conversations deeper. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Daniel spoke of his time in the war, nightmares that still plagued him, and his dream of building something meaningful from the ashes of that conflict. Josephine shared her own losses: her mother's early death, her father's declining health and desperation. "Sometimes I wonder if I made a terrible mistake coming west," she admitted. Daniel's hand covered hers briefly. "I'm not sorry you came." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, full of unspoken meaning. 3 months after her arrival, disaster struck. Josephine returned from gathering wildflowers to find Mrs. Winters in a state. Bank men came with the sheriff. "They're taking your trunk, claiming rights to whatever's inside," Daniel stormed in moments later, having heard from one of his hands. "I'll get it back," he promised, already heading for his horse. "Daniel, wait." Josephine caught his arm. "There's something I haven't told you." In her room, she pulled a loose floorboard free, retrieving a small velvet pouch. "I did have one thing of value." She emptied the contents into her palm, a diamond ring and matching earrings. "My grandmother's. I hid them because I feared Mr. Hollister might be unscrupulous." Daniel stared at the jewelry. "Why didn't you sell these when you needed money? They're all I have left of my family. I couldn't." Tears filled her eyes. "But now I have no choice." Daniel gently closed her fingers over the jewelry. "There's always a choice. I'm riding to town." Hours later, he returned with her trunk and surprising news. Kendrick dropped the claims. "How? Why?" Daniel looked uncomfortable. "Let's just say I made him understand the situation differently." Mrs. Winters, who had been hovering nearby, snorted. "He threatened to expose Kendrick's creative bookkeeping to the territorial judge, is what he did." "Martha," Daniel warned, but the older woman just smiled and returned to the kitchen. Josephine studied his face. "You risked your standing in the community for me." "Some things matter more than standing." Their eyes met, and this time neither looked away. "Josephine, I've grown to, that is, these months with you here." The dinner bell interrupted his halting speech. The moment passed, but something had fundamentally changed between them. The following Sunday, Daniel surprised Josephine by asking if she'd accompany him to church in town. Dressed in her best, the blue traveling dress now carefully mended, Josephine felt every eye upon them as they entered the small church together. After the service, several townswomen approached, introducing themselves with varying degrees of warmth. The mayor's wife, Mrs. Henderson, extended an invitation to join the ladies' auxiliary. "We're organizing a harvest festival," she explained. "And I understand you were a teacher back east." "Our school remains closed since Miss Fisher's departure." Word of Josephine's background had spread, it seemed. By the time they left town, she had been unofficially offered the teaching position for the coming term. "You could take it," Daniel said as they rode home. "It would give you independence." Josephine studied his profile. "Is that what you want, for me to leave Silvercrest?" Daniel's hands tightened on the reins. "I want you to have choices, real ones, not forced by circumstance." That night, unable to sleep, Josephine slipped outside. The moon illuminated the ranch in silver light. She had come to love this place, its rhythms, its smells, the vastness of the sky above it. "Can't sleep," Daniel's voice startled her. He stood in the shadows of the porch, just thinking. She moved closer to him. "About choices." And "I've been running from one situation to another, letting circumstances dictate my path. Coming west was the first real choice I made for myself." Daniel stepped into the moonlight. "What do you want, Josephine? Truly want?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. "I want to stop running, to build something lasting." She took a deep breath. "I've grown to care for you, Daniel, more than care." His expression changed, softened. "I've loved you since I found you by those tracks, though I didn't know it then." The confession, so plainly stated, took her breath away. Daniel moved closer, hesitantly reaching for her hands. "I'm not an educated man, not refined like the gentleman you knew in Boston, but I can offer you a good life, a true partnership." His voice deepened. "If you'll have me." "Are you asking me to marry you, Daniel Patterson?" "I am. Not because you need rescuing anymore, but because I can't imagine this place, my life, without you in it." Josephine stepped into his arms. "Then my answer is yes." Their first kiss, tender under the vast Wyoming sky, held the promise of all that would follow. They married 2 weeks later in the same church where they'd attended service together. Mrs. Winters cried throughout the ceremony, while Daniel's ranch hands stood awkwardly in their Sunday best. The townspeople came too, curiosity mingled with genuine well-wishes. Sheriff Taylor, who had become a friend through their ordeal with Kendrick, stood as Daniel's best man. "Never thought I'd see the day," he whispered as Daniel waited for his bride. "You're a lucky man, Patterson." Josephine, wearing her mother's wedding dress rescued from the trunk, walked alone down the aisle. No father to give her away, but she found she preferred it walking toward her future of her own accord, making this final choice herself. Daniel's face as he watched her approach was a revelation. Love, wonder, and a fierce protectiveness all mingled in his expression. When he took her hand, it felt like coming home. The wedding celebration continued at Silvercrest, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns strung between trees. There was dancing to fiddle music, laughter, and more food than Josephine had ever seen in one place. As evening fell, Daniel pulled her away from the festivities toward the barn. "I have something to show you." Inside, he led her to a stall where a beautiful Palomino mare stood. "She's yours." Every ranch wife needs her own horse. Josephine reached out to stroke the mare's velvety nose. "She's magnificent. Does she have a name?" "I thought you might want to name her yourself," Josephine considered. "Hope, I'll call her Hope." Daniel smiled, understanding. "Perfect." Later that night, alone in the main bedroom now transformed with fresh curtains and linens, Josephine discovered another side of Daniel, gentle, passionate, his touch reverent as they consummated their marriage. Afterward, lying in his arms, she marveled at the journey that had brought her here. "What are you thinking?" he murmured against her hair. "That sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best." He lifted himself on one elbow to look at her. "Being abandoned at that train station, finding you." She traced his face with her fingers. "I came west seeking security, but I found love instead." The following years brought changes to Silvercrest. The ranch prospered under their joint care. Daniel expanded their cattle operation, while Josephine started a small orchard and vegetable garden that supplied not only their household, but brought extra income at the town market. Josephine did eventually teach, but not in the town school. Instead, she converted an unused bunkhouse into a classroom for the children of nearby ranches who couldn't easily reach town. 3 days a week, children arrived on horseback or in wagons for lessons. Their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth after Josephine's mother, arrived a year after their marriage. Strong-willed and curious, she became the center of their world. 2 years later, Samuel joined the family, with Daniel's quiet demeanor but Josephine's thoughtful eyes. The children grew alongside the ranch, learning both academics from their mother and practical ranching skills from their father. The family weathered difficult seasons, drought years, harsh winters, and a terrifying wildfire that nearly reached their home. Through it all, Daniel and Josephine's partnership deepened. They disagreed at times. She thought he was overprotective. He found her occasionally stubborn, but they always found their way back to understanding. Each night, no matter how exhausting the day, they took time to sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over their land. On their 5th anniversary, Daniel surprised Josephine with a trip to Boston. It was his first journey so far east, and her first return since leaving. They visited her parents' graves, and Josephine made peace with the past she had fled. "Do you ever regret it?" Daniel asked as they stood on Boston Harbor, watching ships come and go, leaving all this civilization for the wilderness. Josephine slipped her hand into his. "Never. I found my true self in that wilderness. And you?" The woman who returned to Wyoming was even more certain of her place in the world. Silvercrest was home now, the life she had built with Daniel more fulfilling than any she could have imagined that desperate day by the railroad tracks. 10 years after Daniel found Josephine weeping beside those tracks, Silvercrest had transformed into one of the most respected ranches in the territory. Their home had expanded to accommodate their growing family. A third child, another boy they named James, had joined them, and Daniel's reputation as a fair businessman and exceptional rancher had spread. Josephine, now known throughout the county for her education initiatives, had helped establish a proper school in Willow Creek and a small lending library stocked with books ordered from back east. She remained involved in both, balancing these responsibilities with ranch life. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Daniel made it a tradition to ride with Josephine to the spot where he'd found her. They would picnic beside the tracks, now part of a busier line as the West continued to develop. "I was so lost that day," Josephine reflected as they spread a blanket in the shade. Elizabeth, now 9, helped her younger brothers set out the food, certain my life was over before it had truly begun. Daniel watched their children play, Samuel teaching James how to skip stones across a nearby creek. "I had no idea my life was about to begin." Josephine leaned against his shoulder. "Would you believe I almost took a different train? There was one bound for San Francisco leaving the same day." "Then some other lucky man would have found you," she shook her head. "I don't believe that. Some things are meant, Daniel. Finding you that day, that was meant." That evening, after the children were asleep, Daniel and Josephine sat on their porch swing, her head resting on his shoulder as they gazed at stars scattered like diamond dust across the Wyoming sky. His arm around her was still strong, still her sanctuary. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He placed a small box in her hand. "Open it." Inside was a delicate gold locket. When she opened it, she found a tiny painting of the railroad tracks on one side and the Silvercrest Ranch house on the other. "To remember where we began and what we've built," Daniel explained. Together, tears filled Josephine's eyes as he fastened it around her neck. "It's perfect. Like you," he said simply, drawing her close. As the years continued to pass, Silvercrest remained the center of their world, but not its boundary. Both Daniel and Josephine ensured their children experienced more than ranch life. They traveled when possible, brought books and newspapers from across the country into their home, and welcomed visitors from diverse backgrounds. When Elizabeth announced her intention to attend college back east, Daniel struggled with the idea but supported her decision. "Your mother came west to find herself," he told his daughter. "Maybe you need to go east for the same reason." Samuel, more tied to the land, became Daniel's right hand in ranch operations, introducing innovative techniques he read about in agricultural journals. Young James showed artistic talent, his drawings of Western landscapes eventually finding their way into magazines and exhibitions. Through the children's growths and departures, Daniel and Josephine remained constant to each other. Their love, which had begun in an improbable rescue beside the railroad tracks, had weathered into something as enduring as the mountains that framed their horizon. On their 25th anniversary, with their children and grandchildren gathered at Silvercrest, Daniel proposed again, dropping to one knee despite his 60-year-old joints protesting. "Josephine Davis Patterson, will you continue to do me the honor of being my wife?" "For 25 more years and 25 after that if we're lucky." Laughing through happy tears, surrounded by the family they'd created together, Josephine gave the same answer she had all those years ago. "Yes, Daniel, always yes." That night, as they danced under the stars to fiddle music played by their eldest grandson, Daniel held her close. "Do you remember what you said when I found you that day?" he asked. "You said you were a mail-order bride with no groom." Josephine smiled up at him. "And you became the groom I never expected but always needed. Best decision I ever made," Daniel said, lifting you onto that horse. And as they swayed together under the vast Wyoming sky, both knew with absolute certainty that their greatest adventure had begun that day beside the railroad tracks, an adventure of love that had carried them across decades and would continue beyond their time, living on in the children and the land they cherished.